If you're wondering how I ended up in a courtroom with evidence that would destroy my family's 40-year legacy, it started with a phone call that wasn't meant for my husband. 7 words from my best friend's trembling voice that froze my blood. "The adoption papers are finally ready, darling." I still remember standing in our bedroom doorway, watching steam escape from our master bathroom as the shower ran. Harold's phone buzzed on the nightstand, its screen lighting up with a name that made my heart stop. Margaret Chen, best friend. We'd been inseparable for 35 years, ever since our children played together in the same sandbox at Riverside Elementary. She was the godmother to my grandchildren, the woman who held my hand through my daughter's cancer scare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The person I trusted with every secret I'd ever carried. Why was she calling my husband at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning? My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and until that moment, I thought I knew exactly who I was. At 68, I was the proud matriarch of the Whitmore family, grandmother to 5 beautiful children, and wife to Harold Whitmore for 43 years. We lived in the elegant Victorian home on Maple Hill that had been in Harold's family for 3 generations, the same house where we'd raised our 2 children, hosted countless family gatherings, and built what everyone in Millbrook considered the perfect marriage. Harold and I had started Whitmore and Associates Financial Planning together in 1985, building it from a 2-person operation in our converted garage into one of the most respected wealth management firms in the tri-state area. Our client roster included judges, business owners, and 3 generations of some of the area's most prominent families. We specialized in estate planning, trust management, and what Harold called legacy preservation, helping families protect their wealth for future generations. I handled the client relations and administrative oversight, while Harold managed the investment strategies and legal documentation. We were partners in every sense of the word, or so I believed. Our success had afforded us a comfortable retirement, though we still maintained active roles in the business. Our son Michael had joined the firm 5 years ago, and our daughter Sarah worked as our part-time marketing coordinator, while raising her 3 children. Margaret Chen had been woven into the fabric of our lives for decades. Her late husband Robert had been Harold's college roommate and business partner, until his death from a heart attack 8 years ago. Margaret lived alone now, in the sprawling colonial just 6 blocks from our home, but she remained like family to us. She joined us for Sunday dinners, accompanied us on our annual trips to the Adirondacks, and was Harold's power of attorney after I'd named her mine during a health scare 2 years prior. Our families had grown up together. Margaret's daughter Lisa and our Sarah had been best friends since childhood, and now their children played together just as their mothers once had. Margaret's son David worked as an attorney in Manhattan, but visited frequently, always stopping by our house to pay his respects and catch up on local news. That Tuesday morning had started like countless others. Harold and I shared our usual breakfast of coffee and whole grain toast while reviewing the day's schedule. He had 2 client meetings planned, including one with the Pemberton Family Trust that had been our account for over 15 years. I was scheduled to review quarterly reports and prepare for our monthly board meeting. Everything was routine, comfortable, predictable. Harold kissed my cheek before heading upstairs for his shower, just as he had nearly every morning for 4 decades. I was organizing files in our home office when I heard his phone ringing from the bedroom. The sound itself wasn't unusual. Harold often received early morning calls from clients on the West Coast or international markets, but something made me pause. Maybe it was intuition, or perhaps the particular urgency in the ringtone's persistence. Harold's phone continued buzzing as the shower ran, and curiosity got the better of me. I climbed the stairs and approached our bedroom, thinking I might answer if it was something important. The phone sat on Harold's nightstand, its screen illuminated with an incoming call. When I saw Margaret's name and photo, I felt a flutter of concern. Margaret rarely called Harold directly. She usually went through me for any family coordination or social planning, and never this early in the morning. I watched the call go to voicemail, then immediately start ringing again. Margaret was calling back, which suggested urgency. My finger hovered over the answer button, torn between respecting Harold's privacy and concern for my dearest friend. What if something had happened? What if she needed help? The bathroom door remained closed, shower still running. Harold's morning routine was clockwork. he'd be in there for at least another 10 minutes. Margaret's name appeared on the screen for the third time, and this time I answered. Harold's phone, this is Eleanor, I said, expecting to hear panic or distress in my friend's voice. Instead, I heard something that would haunt me for months to come. Oh God, Margaret whispered, her voice thick with what sounded like tears of relief. Harold, I was so worried you'd changed your mind. The adoption papers are finally ready, darling. We can pick up little Emma this afternoon and begin our new life together. I've been waiting for this moment since we first talked about it 6 months ago. The words hit me like a physical blow. Adoption papers, little Emma, new life together, 6 months of planning. My vision blurred as the implications crashed over me. My husband of 43 years and my best friend of 35 years were, what? Planning to adopt a child together, planning a life together. How long had this been happening? Who was Emma, and what did new life together mean for me? Margaret, I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then in a voice I barely recognized, she said, Eleanor? Oh no, oh no, no. The line went dead. I stood there in my bedroom, Harold's phone trembling in my hand, listening to the sound of my husband's shower, and feeling my world collapse around me. 43 years of marriage, 35 years of friendship, a family business, grandchildren, who adored their grandfather, and Aunt Margaret. The steam continued escaping from under the bathroom door, and I could hear Harold humming an old Frank Sinatra tune, completely unaware that his entire deception had just been exposed by a misdirected phone call. What happened next would unravel secrets that went far deeper than an affair, expose a conspiracy that threatened not just my marriage, but the financial security of dozens of families, and ultimately transform me from a trusting wife and friend into someone I never imagined I could become. But in that moment, standing in my bedroom with my best friend's confession echoing in my ears, I was simply a 68-year-old woman whose entire world had just crumbled with 7 devastating words. The phone slipped from my trembling fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. For a moment, I stood frozen, listening to Harold's off-key humming of Fly Me to the Moon, drifting through the bathroom door. How many mornings had I found that sound comforting? How many times had I smiled at his terrible singing voice echoing off the shower tiles? Now it felt like mockery. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the edge of our 4-poster bed, the same bed where we'd conceived our children, where I'd nursed Harold through pneumonia 3 winters ago, where we'd planned our retirement dreams just last month. The burgundy comforter we'd picked out together at Macy's suddenly felt foreign beneath my hands. Adoption papers, little Emma, new life together. The words replayed in my mind like a broken record. I tried to make sense of them, to find some innocent explanation. Maybe Margaret was adopting a child and needed Harold's financial advice. Maybe new life together meant something else entirely. But even as I grasped for alternative meanings, my heart knew the truth. My husband of 43 years was planning to leave me for my best friend, and they were going to raise a child together. I picked up Harold's phone with shaking hands and saw 17 missed calls from Margaret over the past week. 17 calls I'd never known about. How had I not noticed? Harold always kept his phone nearby, but I'd never thought to question the increasing frequency of his business calls, or his new habit of taking his phone into the bathroom with him. The shower shut off with a familiar metallic clunk. I had maybe 3 minutes before Harold would emerge, towel wrapped around his waist, asking me what I wanted for dinner tonight, as if nothing had changed. As if he wasn't planning to abandon me for my closest friend. My mind raced through recent memories, searching for signs I'd missed. Harold's unexplained absences, claiming he was showing properties to clients I'd never heard of. His newfound interest in updating his wardrobe, trading his comfortable khakis for more stylish pants. The way he'd started going to bed later, claiming he needed to review market reports, while I heard the soft murmur of phone conversations through his home office door. And Margaret, sweet, devoted Margaret who'd been coming to dinner more frequently lately, always asking about Harold's schedule, always seeming to know more about his day than I did. How many times had she hugged me goodbye, while harboring this secret? How many conversations had we shared about Harold while she was planning to steal him away? The bathroom door handle turned. Instinct kicked in. I quickly placed Harold's phone back on the nightstand, and moved to our walk-in closet, pretending to select clothes for the day. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My hands shook as I rifled through blouses, trying to appear normal while my world disintegrated. "Morning, sweetheart," Harold called out, his voice cheerful and warm. "Beautiful day, isn't it? I was thinking we could drive out to Miller's farm this weekend, pick some apples with the grandkids." I gripped a navy cardigan so tightly my knuckles went white. He was planning weekend activities with our grandchildren, while secretly preparing to abandon our family. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. "That sounds lovely," I managed, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. 43 years of marriage had apparently taught me to perform even when my heart was breaking. I heard Harold moving around the bedroom, probably checking his phone. Would he see Margaret's missed calls? Would he panic when he realized what had happened? I stayed in the closet, listening to his movements, waiting for some sign that he understood his deception had been exposed. Instead, I heard him whistling. 20 minutes later, we sat at our kitchen table sharing breakfast, as we had thousands of times before. Harold read sections of the Wall Street Journal aloud, while I stirred my coffee, and watched him over the rim of my cup. His silver hair was neatly combed, his blue eyes bright behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked exactly like the man I'd fallen in love with in 1980, when he was a young financial advisor with big dreams, and I was a newly divorced mother looking for stability. "The Hendersons are coming in at 10, Harold said, consulting his appointment book. "They want to revise their trust after their daughter's divorce. Should be straightforward." I nodded, playing my part in our morning routine while studying his face for signs of guilt or deception. He looked perfectly normal, concerned about clients, planning his day, asking if I wanted him to pick up groceries on his way home. How long had he been lying to me? How many mornings had we shared this same breakfast while he secretly planned his escape? The questions multiplied in my mind like cancer cells, each one more painful than the last. My phone buzzed, a text message from Margaret. "Eleanor, I need to talk to you. Can we meet for coffee today? It's important." Harold glanced up from his newspaper. "Everything okay?" "Just Margaret," I said carefully. "She wants to meet for coffee." Something flickered across his face, so quickly I almost missed it. Fear, panic. Then his expression smoothed back to normal. "That's nice," he said. "You two don't get together enough these days." The lie came so easily to him. I wondered how many others he'd told, how many times he'd encouraged my friendship with Margaret, while planning to destroy everything we'd built together. After Harold left for the office, kissing my cheek with the same tenderness he'd shown for decades, I sat alone in our kitchen and felt the full weight of my situation. I was 68 years old, married to a man who was planning to leave me, betrayed by a woman I'd considered a sister. Our family business, our social circle, our entire life was built on relationships that were apparently lies. But as I sat there among the ruins of my morning routine, something unexpected began to stir beneath the devastation. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but something colder and more determined. I'd spent 43 years building a life with Harold Whitmore. I'd supported his career, raised his children, maintained his home, and trusted him with my heart. I wasn't going to let him and Margaret destroy everything without a fight. I picked up my phone and texted Margaret back. "Coffee sounds perfect. Riverside Cafe at 2 p.m. If they thought they could plan my destruction without consequences, they were about to learn they'd underestimated Eleanor Whitmore. The investigation was about to begin. The 3 hours before my coffee meeting with Margaret felt like the longest of my life. I wandered through our house like a ghost, seeing everything with new eyes. The family photos lining the hallway suddenly looked like evidence of a lie. Our wedding picture, Harold and me laughing on the church steps, seemed to mock me from its silver frame. Had he ever truly loved me, or had I been convenient, a placeholder until something better came along? I found myself in Harold's home office, a space I rarely entered without invitation. It was his sanctuary, lined with law books and financial journals, dominated by a massive oak desk that had belonged to his father. The desk where he'd apparently planned his betrayal of our marriage. My hands shook as I approached his filing cabinets. Harold was meticulous about organization. Every client file, every financial document had its designated place. If there were secrets to uncover, they would be here, hidden among the legitimate business papers. The first drawer contained current client files, alphabetically arranged. I flipped through them carefully, looking for anything unusual. Everything appeared normal until I reached a section marked Personal Development Projects. The name seemed innocuous enough, but it contained files I'd never seen before. My breath caught as I opened the first folder. It contained real estate listings for properties in Sarasota, Florida, beach condominiums, golf course communities, retirement havens, properties that cost far more than Harold and I had ever discussed spending. Properties for two people starting a new life together. The second folder made my knees weak. It contained correspondence with a family law attorney in Florida, discussing residency requirements, asset transfers, and something called strategic financial restructuring. The letters referenced Harold's desire to dissolve his current obligations while protecting his future interests. Current obligations, that's what 43 years of marriage had become to him. But it was the third folder that made me sink into Harold's leather chair, my head spinning with the implications. It contained detailed financial records showing systematic transfers from our business accounts to a series of investment funds I'd never heard of. Small amounts at first, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, but escalating over the past 18 months to transfers of $50,000 or more. The dates corresponded with Harold's increased travel schedule, his client development trips to regional conferences, his weekend continuing education seminars that I'd never been invited to attend. He'd been systematically moving our money, our clients' money, preparing for his escape. My phone buzzed, a text from Harold. Henderson meeting went well, home by 4 p.m, love you, love you. The casual cruelty of those words made me nauseous. How could he text me love declarations while planning to rob me blind? I photographed every document with my phone, my hands steadier now that shock was giving way to grim determination. If Harold thought he could outsmart me after 4 decades of marriage, he was about to discover he'd underestimated the woman who'd helped him build his career from nothing. An hour later, I sat across from Margaret at Riverside Cafe, studying the face of the woman I'd trusted with my deepest secrets. She looked terrible, pale, hollow-eyed, fidgeting with her coffee cup like a guilty child. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually perfect silver hair appeared hastily arranged. "Eleanor," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "About this morning, tell me about Emma," I said quietly, watching her face crumble. Margaret's composure dissolved entirely. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she struggled to speak. "She's 3 years old. Her mother is one of Harold's clients, a young woman who got pregnant and can't care for her anymore. Harold said we could give Emma a better life, that we could be the family she deserves." The explanation hit me like a physical blow. Not only was Harold leaving me for my best friend, but they were planning to raise a child together. A child whose mother was Harold's client, which raised disturbing questions about professional ethics and potential exploitation. "How long?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the turmoil inside. 6 months, Margaret whispered. Since Robert's estate was finally settled, Harold helped me through all the legal complications, and we grew close. He said you two had grown apart, that your marriage was more habit than love. He said you'd be happier without him holding you back. The lies came so easily from her lips, repeated verbatim from Harold's manipulation. I could see how he'd convinced her a lonely widow, vulnerable after her husband's death, grateful for Harold's professional help and personal attention. He'd probably made her feel like she was rescuing him from an unhappy marriage rather than destroying a family. "Margaret," I said carefully, "has Harold asked you to sign any papers, transfer any money, make any financial commitments for this adoption?" Her eyes widened. "How did you know?" He said the adoption required certain financial guarantees. "I signed some papers last week putting up my house as collateral. And I transferred most of Robert's life insurance money into a special account Harold set up for Emma's future education and medical expenses." My blood turned to ice. Harold wasn't just stealing from me. He was systematically robbing Margaret as well. The adoption story was likely fabricated, a way to convince her to liquidate her assets and transfer them to accounts he controlled. Margaret, in her grief and loneliness, had become the perfect mark for his elaborate con. "Margaret, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said, leaning forward. "I don't think Harold is planning to adopt a child with you. I think he's stealing from both of us." Her face went white. "That's impossible. Harold loves me. We're building a future together." I pulled out my phone and showed her the photographs I'd taken of Harold's files. The real estate listings, the legal correspondence, the financial transfers. As she scrolled through the images, I watched understanding dawn in her eyes. "These properties in Florida," she whispered. "Harold showed me similar ones. He said we'd look at them together next month for our new home." "Did he mention anyone else would be joining you? Another woman, perhaps?" Margaret's hands trembled as she continued scrolling through the evidence. When she reached the financial records showing the systematic theft from our business accounts, she let out a soft moan. "Oh God, Eleanor, what have I done? Robert's life insurance money, that was supposed to last me the rest of my life." I reached across the table and took her hands. Despite everything, despite her betrayal of our friendship, I felt sorry for her. We were both victims of Harold's elaborate deception. "We're going to get your money back," I told her firmly. "And we're going to stop him from hurting anyone else. But I need you to help me. I need to know everything he's told you. Every paper you've signed. Every promise he's made." Margaret nodded through her tears. "There's more. He said there were other investors involved. Other people contributing to Emma's trust fund. He showed me a list of names, all clients of your firm. Eleanor, I think he's been stealing from everyone." The scope of Harold's deception was becoming clear. This wasn't just about leaving me for my best friend. This was about a systematic scheme to defraud our clients, steal their trust funds, and disappear with millions of dollars. Harold had been using our 40-year reputation to build confidence, while methodically robbing the families who trusted us with their life savings. "Margaret," I said, my voice steady with newfound resolve, "how would you feel about helping me expose Harold's crimes? It won't be easy, and it won't be safe, but it's the only way to stop him and protect everyone else he's planning to hurt." She wiped her tears and looked at me with something like her old determination. "What do we need to do?" As I outlined my preliminary plan, I realized that Margaret's betrayal had inadvertently given me the perfect partner for bringing Harold down. She had access to information I didn't, connections he'd built with her that could be turned against him. Together, we could gather evidence that would expose his crimes and ensure he faced justice. Harold thought he'd been clever, playing two vulnerable women against each other. Instead, he'd created a team of adversaries who knew him better than anyone else in the world. His biggest mistake was underestimating the women he'd betrayed. Margaret and I spent the next 2 hours at Riverside Cafe, transforming from betrayed women into strategic partners. As painful as it was to hear the details of her relationship with Harold, I needed to understand the full scope of his deception. Every lie he'd told her, every promise he'd made, every document he'd convinced her to sign, was a piece of the puzzle we needed to solve. "He has a safety deposit box," Margaret revealed, stirring her third cup of coffee with nervous energy. "At First National Bank downtown. He gave me a key last month, said it contained important papers for Emma's adoption. He told me never to go there without him, that the contents were too sensitive to handle alone." My pulse quickened. A secret safety deposit box meant Harold was hiding something significant, possibly documents or assets he didn't want traced back to our joint accounts. "Do you still have the key?" Margaret nodded, reaching into her purse to produce a small silver key. "I was supposed to give it back to him after we moved to Florida, but after this morning," she trailed off, the implications hanging between us. "We need professional help," I said, making a decision that would have terrified me just hours earlier. "Someone who understands financial fraud and can guide us through the legal implications of what we're uncovering." Margaret looked puzzled. "Who could we trust?" "Harold knows every attorney and accountant in town. Most of them are his clients." I thought about our options carefully. Harold's professional network was extensive, but it wasn't complete. "David Chen," I said suddenly. "Your son David. He's a financial crimes attorney in Manhattan, and he's not connected to Harold's business dealings here." The color drained from Margaret's face. I can't tell David about this. He'll never forgive me for betraying you and your family. He grew up thinking of you as his second mother. That's exactly why he'll help us, I assured her. David cares about you, and he'll want to protect you from Harold's scheme. Besides, we need someone we can trust absolutely, someone who understands both the legal and emotional complexities of what we're dealing with. After much persuasion, Margaret agreed to call David. We used her phone to avoid any connection to my number, and she arranged to meet him that evening at her house, under the pretense of needing help with some of Robert's remaining estate issues. While Margaret made travel arrangements for David, I focused on our next crucial ally, Patricia Wells, our firm's longtime bookkeeper. Patricia had worked for Whitmore and Associates for 15 years, handling day-to-day financial operations with meticulous attention to detail. If anyone would notice irregularities in our accounts, it would be her. Patricia was a widow in her early 60s, fiercely loyal to our family business, but with a rigid moral compass that wouldn't tolerate financial impropriety. I'd always appreciated her directness and integrity, qualities that now made her the perfect ally for exposing Harold's crimes. I called Patricia from Margaret's phone, asking her to meet me at the office after hours. I need to review some account discrepancies privately, I told her. Nothing urgent, but I'd prefer to handle it discreetly until I understand what we're dealing with. Patricia agreed immediately, her professional instincts recognizing the gravity in my tone. Mrs. Whitmore, if there's something wrong with our books, I need to know about it. My reputation is tied to this firm's financial integrity. I know, Patricia. That's exactly why I'm coming to you first. By 6 o'clock that evening, I found myself in our firm's offices after hours, surrounded by computer printouts and financial ledgers, while Patricia walked me through 15 years of account histories. Her face grew increasingly grave as I showed her the photographs from Harold's files and explained what I'd discovered. These transfers, Patricia said, pointing to a series of entries I'd photographed. I processed most of these, but Mr. Whitmore always provided detailed explanations. Investment diversification, he called it. Moving client funds into higher yield opportunities. Did you verify these investment opportunities independently? Patricia shook her head slowly. Mr. Whitmore handled all investment decisions. That was always his area of expertise. I trusted his judgment completely. We spent 2 hours going through client accounts, cross-referencing Harold's unauthorized transfers with Patricia's meticulous records. The pattern that emerged was both sophisticated and devastating. Harold had been systematically skimming funds from dozens of accounts, always small enough amounts to avoid triggering automatic alerts, but totaling millions of dollars over 18 months. Mrs. Whitmore, Patricia said, finally, her voice shaking with emotion. These families trusted us with their life savings. The Hendersons' retirement fund, the Morrison Children's Education Trusts, the Blackwell family's estate planning accounts. Harold has been stealing from all of them. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. These weren't just clients, they were neighbors, family friends, people who'd trusted Harold with their financial futures, based on 40 years of reputation and community standing. What happens when they find out? Patricia asked. Our firm's license, our insurance, our legal liability, this will destroy everything we've built. That's why we have to stop him before he disappears with the money, I said firmly. And that's why I need you to help me gather evidence that will stand up in court. Patricia straightened her shoulders, her bookkeeper's instincts taking over. What do you need me to do? Can you create a complete audit trail without alerting Harold? Every transfer, every account, every transaction that doesn't match normal investment patterns. It'll take all night, but yes, I can have everything documented by morning. Meanwhile, across town, Margaret was having an equally difficult but necessary conversation with her son David. He'd driven up from Manhattan in record time after hearing the urgency in his mother's voice, and she was finally telling him the truth about her relationship with Harold and the financial commitments she'd made. Margaret called me at 9 o'clock, her voice heavy with exhaustion but tinged with relief. David is furious, but not at me. He wants to meet with us tomorrow morning. He says what Harold has done constitutes multiple felonies: fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse, breach of fiduciary duty. He's already contacted a colleague who specializes in financial crimes. How much trouble are we in legally? David says that depends on how quickly we act and how much evidence we can gather. If we can prove Harold systematically deceived his clients and stole their money, we might be able to recover most of the funds and avoid criminal liability for the firm. And if we can't, Margaret's silence spoke volumes. By midnight, our unlikely alliance had taken shape. Patricia was in our office, printing financial records and creating detailed spreadsheets that documented years of Harold's theft. David Chen was driving back to Manhattan to meet with federal investigators who specialized in financial crimes. Margaret was at home, searching through every document Harold had given her, looking for additional evidence of his scheme. And I was sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and planning the confrontation that would determine whether Harold Whitmore would spend his retirement years in Florida beaches or federal prison. For 43 years, I'd been Harold's loyal wife, trusting partner, and devoted supporter. I'd helped him build a reputation based on integrity and community service, never imagining he was using that reputation to systematically rob the people who trusted us most. Tomorrow, Harold would return home expecting to find the same compliant woman he'd been deceiving for months. Instead, he would face a strategic alliance that understood his crimes better than he realized, armed with evidence that could destroy him completely. The scared, heartbroken woman who'd answered Margaret's phone call that morning was gone. In her place stood someone Harold had never encountered before, Eleanor Whitmore as an adversary. He was about to discover that underestimating your wife of 43 years was a mistake that would cost him everything. By Thursday morning, our alliance had transformed into a well-oiled investigation machine. Patricia arrived at the office at dawn with 3 bankers' boxes full of documented evidence, spreadsheets, transaction records, and client correspondence that painted a devastating picture of Harold's systematic theft. David Chen had spent the night coordinating with federal investigators, and Margaret had discovered additional documents that revealed the true scope of Harold's Florida escape plan. I sat in our kitchen at 6 a.m., reviewing the evidence while Harold showered upstairs, completely oblivious to the storm gathering around him. The irony wasn't lost on me. Exactly 48 hours ago, I'd been the naive wife. Now I was orchestrating his downfall from the same breakfast table where he'd been lying to my face for months. My phone buzzed with a text from David. FBI Financial Crimes Unit wants to meet today. Can you be in Manhattan by 2 p.m.? The reality of federal involvement sent a chill through me. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. Harold's crimes had crossed state lines and involved federal banking regulations. The nice life we'd built in Millbrook was about to become national news. Harold appeared in the kitchen, freshly shaved and humming that same Frank Sinatra tune. Morning, sweetheart. Beautiful day for the Pemberton Trust Review. I should be home by 5. Claes thought we could try that new Italian place for dinner. I studied his face as he poured coffee, searching for any sign that he suspected our investigation. But Harold appeared completely relaxed, already mentally planning our evening, while preparing to steal from the Pemberton Family Trust that afternoon. That sounds lovely, I managed, marveling at how easily deception came to both of us now. I'll make reservations. After Harold left for the office, I called Patricia with our final instructions. Today is the day. We need everything documented and copied before Harold realizes what we've discovered. Can you handle the Pemberton meeting without raising suspicions?
Already planned.
Patricia replied grimly. I've prepared 2 sets of documents, the legitimate trust review Harold expects, and the real accounting that shows how much he's already stolen from their family. Mrs. Whitmore, the Pembertons have been with us since 1987. Harold has taken nearly $300,000 from their retirement accounts. The number hit me like a physical blow. The Pembertons were in their 70s, trusting Harold with funds meant to last them through their final years. Harold wasn't just stealing money, he was stealing their security, their dignity, their ability to age with independence. Make sure you're recording everything, I told Patricia. David says we need Harold's own words acknowledging the transfers if we want to avoid a lengthy trial. By noon I was on a train to Manhattan, carrying a briefcase full of evidence that would destroy my husband's life. The journey felt surreal, passing familiar Connecticut suburbs, while clutching documents that would send Harold to federal prison. Other passengers read newspapers or typed on laptops, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the quiet car. David met me at Penn Station, his expression grim but determined. At 35, he had his mother's compassionate eyes, but his father's steel resolve. "Eleanor," he said, embracing me awkwardly, "I'm sorry this happened to you, and I'm sorry about my mother's role in it." "Your mother is as much a victim as I am," I assured him. Harold manipulated her grief and loneliness. "We're going to make sure he pays for that too." The FBI field office in Lower Manhattan was nothing like the dramatic settings I'd seen in movies. Agent Sarah Martinez was a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who specialized in elder financial abuse cases. She reviewed our evidence with practiced efficiency, asking pointed questions about Harold's methods and timeline. "Mr. Whitmore has been very careful," Agent Martinez observed. "Small amounts from multiple accounts, legitimate-looking investment transfers, proper paperwork for most transactions. This is sophisticated theft, not amateur hour." "What does that mean for prosecution?" David asked. "It means he's done this before, probably for years. Men like Harold Whitmore don't develop this level of sophistication overnight. We'll need to investigate his entire career, probably going back decades." The implications were staggering. How many families had Harold robbed over 40 years? How many trusting clients had lost their life savings to his schemes? "We need him to confess voluntarily," Agent Martinez continued. "Recorded admissions of guilt, preferably with details about where he's hidden the money and how he planned to access it in Florida." "Can you arrange that?" I thought about Harold's planned meeting with the Pembertons, his casual dinner invitation, his complete confidence that his deception remained undetected. "Yes," I said firmly. "I can arrange that." Agent Martinez handed me a small recording device, no larger than a credit card. "This will capture everything within 15 feet. But Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to understand the risks. If Harold realizes what you're doing, if he feels cornered, there's no predicting how he might react. He's been lying to me for months while planning to rob me blind," I replied. "I think I can handle one honest conversation." By evening I was back in Millbrook, sitting in our kitchen with the recording device hidden in my sweater pocket. Harold would be home any minute, expecting to find his compliant wife ready for a romantic dinner at the new Italian restaurant. Instead, he would find a woman who knew everything about Margaret, about Florida, about the systematic theft that had funded his escape plan. Tonight, Harold Whitmore would face the consequences of underestimating the woman he'd promised to love and honor 43 years ago. The setup was complete. Now came the confrontation that would determine whether justice would be served, or whether Harold would disappear into his carefully planned new life, leaving behind a trail of devastated families and broken trust. I checked my watch, 4:55 p.m. In 5 minutes, Harold would walk through our front door for the last time as my husband. Harold's car pulled into our driveway at exactly 5 o'clock, just as it had thousands of times before. I watched from our kitchen window as he gathered his briefcase and walked up the flagstone path, whistling that same Sinatra tune. He looked relaxed, satisfied, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. The recording device felt warm against my chest as I opened the front door with a smile. "How was your day, darling? Did the Pemberton meeting go well?" "Perfectly," Harold said, kissing my cheek with practiced affection. "We restructured their portfolio to maximize returns. They'll be very pleased with the results." The casual lie rolled off his tongue so easily. According to Patricia's report, Harold had just transferred another $50,000 from the Pemberton Trust into his Florida accounts, while convincing them it was a routine investment adjustment. "That's wonderful," I said, following him into the kitchen. "Would you like some wine before dinner? We should celebrate your successful day." Harold's eyebrows rose slightly. I rarely suggested wine on weeknight dinners, but he nodded enthusiastically. "Excellent idea. Let me just check my messages first." As Harold scrolled through his phone, I poured 2 glasses of his favorite Cabernet, my hands surprisingly steady despite the gravity of what I was about to do. The recording device captured every sound: Harold's satisfied humming, the clink of wine glasses, the ordinary domestic sounds that masked the extraordinary confrontation about to unfold. "Harold, I said carefully. I had an interesting phone call this morning. He looked up from his phone, his expression mildly curious. Oh, anyone I know? Margaret Chen. The change in Harold's face was subtle, but unmistakable. His smile flickered, his eyes sharpened with sudden attention. Margaret? What did she want? She wanted to apologize, I said, taking a sip of wine while watching his reaction. She accidentally called your phone yesterday instead of mine. She was quite upset about the confusion. Harold's grip tightened on his wine glass. I see. What kind of confusion? Something about adoption papers being ready. A little girl named Emma. Plans for a new life together. I kept my voice conversational, as if discussing the weather. She seemed to think you and she were adopting a child together. The silence that followed was deafening. Harold set down his wine glass with deliberate care, his mind clearly racing to formulate a response. I could see him calculating, weighing his options, trying to determine how much I actually knew. Eleanor, he began slowly, I think Margaret may be having some emotional difficulties since Robert's death. She's been confused about certain conversations we've had regarding estate planning. So you're not planning to adopt a child with her? Of course not. That's ridiculous. And you're not planning to move to Florida together? Harold's face went pale. Florida? Where did you get that idea? I reached into my purse and pulled out photocopies of the real estate listings from his desk. From these beachfront condominiums in Sarasota, all in the price range of someone who's been systematically stealing from client accounts for 18 months. The blood drained from Harold's face entirely. For a moment he looked like he might faint. Then his survival instincts kicked in, and I saw a side of my husband I'd never encountered before. Cold, calculating, dangerous. You went through my private files, he said, his voice hardening. You had no right. I had every right. Those client accounts you've been raiding, half of them list me as co-trustee. Every theft you've committed implicates me legally. Harold stood abruptly, pacing to the kitchen window with the agitated energy of a trapped animal. You don't understand the complexities of modern portfolio management. Those transfers were strategic repositioning, not theft. Strategic repositioning. I laughed bitterly. Is that what you call stealing $300,000 from the Pembertons' retirement fund? Strategic repositioning of elderly people's life savings into your personal escape fund. Those families trusted us to maximize their returns, Harold said, turning to face me with desperate intensity. I was investing their money in opportunities they never would have considered on their own. Without their knowledge or consent. That's called embezzlement, Harold. The pretense finally cracked. Harold's shoulders sagged as the weight of exposure settled over him. How long have you known? Since yesterday morning when Margaret accidentally called your phone instead of her financial advisors. She thought she was calling to confirm adoption arrangements. Instead, she exposed a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Harold sank back into his chair, his face aging 10 years in as many seconds. What do you want? I want the truth. All of it. How long you've been stealing from our clients, how much money you've taken, where you've hidden it, and what you were planning to do to me when you disappeared to Florida. For a long moment Harold stared into his wine glass as if it contained the answers to his dilemma. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. It started small. 5 years ago when the market crashed and several clients lost significant money, I borrowed from other accounts to cover the losses, planning to pay it back when things recovered. But you never paid it back. The opportunities in Florida were too good to pass up. Resort developments, beachfront properties, retirement communities. The returns were incredible. I was going to make everyone wealthy, including yourself. Harold's laugh was bitter, especially myself. Do you know what it's like, Eleanor? Managing other people's wealth for 40 years while living on a modest salary. Watching clients become millionaires from investments I recommended while we struggled to afford a decent vacation. The resentment in his voice was shocking. 43 years of marriage, and I'd never realized my husband harbored such bitterness about our comfortable, but not extravagant lifestyle. So you decided to steal from them. I decided to take what I deserved, Harold said, his voice gaining strength. And yes, Margaret was part of the plan. A lonely widow with substantial assets and no family oversight. She was perfect. The callous admission made me sick. What about me, Harold? What was I in your grand plan? Harold met my eyes directly for the first time since the conversation began. You were going to be comfortable, Eleanor, well provided for. I wasn't planning to leave you destitute, just abandoned and publicly humiliated when your crimes were discovered. That wasn't supposed to happen. By the time anyone noticed the missing money, we would have been settled in Florida with new identities and enough wealth to last several lifetimes. The recording device had captured everything: Harold's admission of systematic theft, his callous manipulation of Margaret, his plan to abandon me with the legal consequences of his crimes. Agent Martinez would have everything she needed to prosecute him successfully. But as I looked at my husband of 43 years, this stranger who had been planning my destruction while sharing my bed, I felt something unexpected alongside the pain and anger. Relief. The man I thought I'd married had been an illusion. The real Harold Whitmore was finally visible, and he was someone I was grateful to be rid of. Harold, I said quietly, you have exactly 24 hours to return every penny you've stolen to our clients' accounts. After that, I'm turning everything over to the FBI. His face went white with terror. Eleanor, please. If you expose this, it will destroy both of us. The firm, our reputation, our family's legacy, everything will be gone. You should have thought of that before you decided to rob our friends and neighbors, I replied, standing to clear our untouched dinner plates. And Harold, pack your bags tonight. Whether you're going to Florida or federal prison, you're not sleeping in my house again. As Harold stumbled out of the kitchen, broken and defeated, I felt the weight of 43 years of marriage lifting from my shoulders. Tomorrow would bring federal agents, media attention, and the complex work of rebuilding trust with the families Harold had betrayed. But tonight, for the first time in months, I would sleep peacefully, knowing that justice was finally within reach. I woke the next morning to an empty house and a note on Harold's pillow: gone to make arrangements. Please don't do anything irreversible until we can talk properly. Knees. The cowardice of it made me laugh. Despite everything. After 43 years of marriage, Harold was ending our relationship with a hastily scrawled note, still trying to manipulate me even in his desperation. He'd packed his clothes sometime before dawn and slipped away like a thief, which I supposed was exactly what he was. My phone rang at 7 a.m. Agent Martinez's voice was crisp and professional. Mrs. Whitmore, we need to meet immediately. Our surveillance team lost contact with your husband around 3 a.m. His car was found abandoned at Logan Airport in Boston. The news hit me like cold water. Harold hadn't gone to make arrangements. He'd run. After confessing everything to me, after promising to return the stolen money, he'd chosen flight over accountability. Does this mean he's escaped? Not necessarily. We've alerted airport security and customs, and we're monitoring his known accounts. But Mrs. Whitmore, this changes everything. We need to move quickly to freeze assets and protect the remaining client funds before he can access them remotely. By 9 a.m., our quiet Millbrook offices were transformed into a federal crime scene. FBI agents swarmed through Harold's files while Patricia guided them through 40 years of financial records. David Chen had driven up from Manhattan with a team of federal prosecutors, and Margaret sat in the conference room, pale but resolute as she provided detailed statements about Harold's manipulation. I found myself at the center of a storm I'd never imagined. News vans lined our street as word spread through town about Harold's disappearance and the federal investigation. Reporters called our office phone constantly, forcing Patricia to disconnect the main line. Our receptionist quit by noon, overwhelmed by the chaos. Miss Whitmore, Agent Martinez said, pulling me aside as investigators continued their work. We've recovered approximately 60% of the stolen funds from accounts your husband hadn't accessed yet. But there's still over $2 million missing, probably in offshore accounts we haven't identified. $2 million. The number was staggering, representing dozens of families' life savings, retirement funds, and children's education accounts. Harold had stolen more than I'd imagined possible, and now it might be gone forever. What happens to our clients, to the families he robbed? That depends on several factors: insurance coverage, asset recovery, and how quickly we can trace the missing funds. Some families will be made whole, Others may face significant losses. The guilt was overwhelming. These were our neighbors, people who'd trusted Harold because they trusted me. The Hendersons, who'd moved their entire retirement portfolio to our firm after I helped them through their daughter's medical crisis. The Morrison children, whose college funds Harold had been managing since they were toddlers. The Blackwell family, who'd trusted us with 3 generations of estate planning. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Morrison. "Eleanor, we're hearing terrible rumors about Harold and missing money. Please tell me it's not true. Tommy starts college in 6 weeks." I stared at the message, unable to respond. How do you tell a family friend that your husband stole her son's college fund? How do you explain that 40 years of trust and friendship had been built on a foundation of lies? By afternoon, the scope of Harold's crimes was becoming clear. Agent Martinez briefed me in our conference room, surrounded by boxes of evidence and timeline charts that looked like something from a conspiracy thriller. "Your husband wasn't just stealing randomly," she explained. "He was specifically targeting families with limited financial sophistication, elderly clients, recent widows, families dealing with medical crises, people who trusted him completely and rarely questioned his investment strategies. He preyed on vulnerability," I said, the realization making me sick. "Exactly, and he used your reputation, Mrs. Whitmore, as collateral for his schemes. Clients trusted Harold because they trusted you. Your 40 years of community involvement, your charity work, your reputation for integrity. He weaponized all of it." The betrayal felt even deeper now. Harold hadn't just stolen money and planned to abandon me. He'd used my life's work, my relationships, my reputation as tools for his crimes. Every family dinner where I'd chatted with clients, every charity event where I'd socialized with their families, every moment of genuine care I'd shown for their welfare, had been twisted into Harold's elaborate con. "There's something else," Agent Martinez continued. "We've been investigating similar patterns in other small firms across New England. Your husband may have been part of a larger network of financial advisors, sharing information and techniques for this kind of sophisticated theft. You're saying he didn't develop these methods alone. We're saying Harold Whitmore was very good at what he did, and that level of expertise usually comes from practice and collaboration." Margaret appeared in the doorway, her face drawn but determined. "Eleanor, there's something else you need to know. Harold called me this morning from an untraceable number. He wanted me to meet him in Montreal with the rest of Robert's insurance money." My blood ran cold. "Please tell me you didn't agree." "I told him I never wanted to see him again," Margaret said firmly. "But Eleanor, he wasn't calling just to convince me to run away with him. He was calling to tell me that you were the real mastermind behind everything." Agent Martinez leaned forward sharply. "What exactly did he say?" "He claimed Eleanor had been pressuring him to steal from clients for years, that she was the one who identified vulnerable targets and encouraged him to take their money. He said, if I testified against him, he would present evidence that Eleanor was the criminal mastermind and he was just following her orders." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Harold's final manipulation wasn't just an attempt to escape justice, it was a calculated effort to destroy me completely. Even from whatever foreign country he was fleeing to, he was trying to frame me for his crimes. "Can he do that?" I asked David, my voice barely above a whisper. David's expression was grim.
"He can try."
"But Eleanor, the evidence against that narrative is overwhelming. The systematic nature of the thefts, the offshore accounts in his name only, the escape plan that excluded you entirely. No prosecutor would believe you were the mastermind. But the damage to your reputation would be significant,"
Agent Martinez added.
"Harold is clearly hoping that even false accusations will destroy your credibility and make it harder for us to recover the missing funds." As I sat in my conference room surrounded by federal agents and evidence of my husband's crimes, I realized that Harold's betrayal was even more complete than I'd imagined. He wasn't just stealing money and planning to abandon me. He was trying to ensure that I would spend the rest of my life under suspicion, my reputation destroyed, my relationships poisoned by doubt. But looking around the room at Margaret, Patricia, David, and Agent Martinez, people who were working tirelessly to expose Harold's crimes and protect his victims, I felt something unexpected, strength. Harold had underestimated me for the last time. He thought he could frame me for his crimes while hiding in some foreign country, counting stolen money and laughing at the chaos he'd left behind. He was about to discover that Eleanor Whitmore wasn't the helpless victim he'd imagined, and the team he'd inadvertently created by betraying so many people was just getting started. 3 days after Harold's disappearance, I stood in the Riverside Community Center, facing a room full of angry, frightened families whose lives had been shattered by my husband's crimes. The Henderson family sat in the front row, their retirement dreams evaporated overnight. Behind them, Sarah Morrison clutched tissues while her husband held printouts showing their son's empty college fund. The Blackwell matriarch, 92 years old and sharp as a tack, stared at me with eyes that had seen too much betrayal for one lifetime. "I know you have questions," I began, my voice steady despite the hostile atmosphere, "and I know you have every right to be angry. Harold Whitmore betrayed your trust, and as his partner in business and life, I bear responsibility for that betrayal." "Where's our money, Eleanor?" called out James Henderson, his voice cracking with emotion. 40 years we've been putting everything into that retirement account. Harold promised us we'd be comfortable in our old age. "The FBI has recovered about 60% of the stolen funds," I replied honestly. "They're working to trace the rest, but I won't lie to you, some of it may be gone forever." A murmur of despair rippled through the room. These weren't wealthy people who could absorb significant losses. They were teachers, small business owners, retirees on fixed incomes, who had trusted Harold with everything they had. Margaret stood up from her seat in the back, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "I want everyone here to know that Eleanor is as much a victim as the rest of us. Harold manipulated me into believing she knew about his affair, that their marriage was a sham. He used my grief and loneliness to steal Robert's life insurance money, and he used Eleanor's reputation to gain your trust while planning to frame her for his crimes." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled families. Many of them had known Margaret for decades, understood her character and integrity. Her public support carried weight that my own words couldn't match. "Mrs. Chen is right," said Patricia Wells, standing from her seat near the front. "I've been processing these accounts for 15 years. Eleanor never had access to the investment systems Harold used for these thefts. She couldn't have known what he was doing, because he specifically designed his methods to exclude her from oversight." David Chen stepped forward, his legal credentials lending authority to his words. "The federal investigation has found no evidence whatsoever that Mrs. Whitmore was involved in or aware of Harold's crimes. In fact, she's the one who exposed him and provided the evidence that allowed authorities to recover as much money as they have." But Thomas Morrison, Sarah's husband, wasn't satisfied with explanations. "That's all well and good, but what about our son's college fund? Tommy starts freshman year in 5 weeks. We don't have $60,000 lying around to replace what Harold stole." The raw pain in his voice cut through my heart. I thought of Tommy Morrison, a bright 18-year-old who'd worked part-time jobs throughout high school to supplement his college savings, never knowing that a family friend was systematically stealing his future. "Mr. Morrison," I said carefully, "I can't promise to restore everything Harold took, but I can promise that I'm going to spend whatever time I have left making this right." Agent Martinez had been standing quietly at the back of the room, but now she stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need you to understand something important. Mrs. Whitmore could have chosen to protect herself when she discovered her husband's crimes. She could have stayed silent, let Harold disappear, and claimed ignorance about everything. Instead, she gathered evidence, cooperated fully with our investigation, and made it possible for us to recover millions of dollars that would otherwise be gone forever." The room fell silent as people absorbed this information. Many of them were seeing me differently now, understanding that my cooperation with the FBI had been a choice that put my own legal and financial security at risk. "There's something else you need to know," Agent Martinez continued. "We believe Harold Whitmore was part of a larger network of financial advisors conducting similar schemes across New England. The evidence Mrs. Whitmore provided has led to investigations of at least 6 other firms, potentially saving hundreds of additional families from similar losses." An unexpected voice spoke from the middle of the room. It was Emma Blackwell, the 92-year-old matriarch, whose family had trusted us for 3 generations. Eleanor, dear, what are you planning to do now? The question caught me off guard. In the chaos of Harold's crimes and disappearance, I hadn't thought much about my own future. I'm not sure, Mrs. Blackwell. The firm will likely have to close. Our reputation is destroyed, and the legal liabilities are overwhelming. That seems like a waste, Mrs. Blackwell observed in her crisp, no-nonsense voice. You've been managing money honestly for 40 years. These families need someone they can trust, someone who's proven they'll do the right thing even when it's difficult. Margaret suddenly stood up again. Mrs. Blackwell is right. Eleanor, what if we started over? A new firm, with complete transparency and oversight? I have some capital left, and my son David could handle the legal structure. The suggestion sent murmurs of interest through the room. David nodded thoughtfully. It's possible. With proper safeguards, federal oversight, and full transparency, we could create a firm that ensures this kind of fraud could never happen again. I'd trust Eleanor with my money, said Patricia Wells. She's the most honest person I've ever worked with. So would I, added James Henderson, surprising everyone including his wife. Harold was the liar and thief, not Eleanor. She's the one who exposed him and got our money back. As I looked around the room at faces that had been hostile an hour earlier, but now showed cautious hope, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that terrible morning, when Margaret's phone call shattered my world. Purpose: Harold had destroyed our firm, stolen millions of dollars, and tried to frame me for his crimes. But in doing so, he'd also inadvertently created something he never intended, a community of people united by shared betrayal, and determined to rebuild something better. If we did this, I said slowly, it would have to be completely different. Full transparency, independent oversight, every client would have access to their accounts at all times. No single person would ever again have the power Harold abused. The room erupted in discussion as families talked among themselves about the possibility of trusting again, of rebuilding what Harold had destroyed. Not everyone was convinced. Several families left without committing to anything, their trust too shattered to repair. But enough remained, enough believed in the possibility of redemption, that when the meeting ended 2 hours later, we had the foundation for something unprecedented. A financial planning firm born from the ashes of betrayal, designed specifically to prevent the crimes that had destroyed its predecessor. Harold had tried to destroy me along with everyone else he'd betrayed. Instead, he'd given me the opportunity to build something better than we'd ever had before. The transformation was just beginning. 6 months after Harold's disappearance, I stood in the offices of Millbrook Trust and Fiduciary Services, the firm we'd built from the ruins of Harold's betrayal. The space was deliberately different from our old offices. Glass-walled conference rooms ensured complete transparency, and every client had real-time digital access to their accounts. David Chen had designed safeguards that made another Harold Whitmore impossible. The Morrison boy got into Harvard, Patricia announced, hanging up the phone with a satisfied smile. Full scholarship plus the college fund we restored. He starts in January. The news brought tears to my eyes. Tommy Morrison's college fund had been one of our first recovery successes, rebuilt through a combination of recovered assets and contributions from other clients who'd insisted on helping families hit hardest by Harold's theft. Our client base had grown steadily over the months. Word spread through Millbrook and neighboring communities about the financial firm that had turned betrayal into transparency, theft into trust. We now managed portfolios for 47 families, including many who'd never been Harold's clients, but were drawn to our radical approach to accountability. Margaret walked into my office carrying a newspaper, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Harold made the news again, she said, placing the Boston Globe on my desk. The headline read, "Fugitive Financial Advisor Arrested in Costa Rica." Below was a photograph of Harold in handcuffs, looking haggard and defeated as he was led to a plane for extradition. According to the article, he'd been living under a false identity in a beachfront villa, funded by the money he'd stolen from his clients. "How do you feel?" Margaret asked, studying my face carefully. I stared at the photograph of the man I'd been married to for 43 years, trying to summon some emotion, anger, sadness, even relief. Instead, I felt only a distant curiosity, as if reading about a stranger's arrest. "Nothing," I said honestly. "He feels like someone I used to know a long time ago." The truth was, I rarely thought about Harold anymore. The woman who'd been devastated by his betrayal felt like a different person, someone I'd outgrown through necessity and choice. The new Eleanor Whitmore was too busy building something meaningful to dwell on the man who'd tried to destroy her. "His extradition hearing is next week," Margaret continued. "David says he'll likely plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, 20 to 25 years in federal prison." I nodded, feeling neither satisfaction nor sympathy. Harold had made his choices, now he would live with the consequences. My energy was focused on the families we were helping rebuild their financial security, and the trust we were earning one honest transaction at a time. "Mrs. Whitmore," Patricia appeared in my doorway. "The Henderson family is here for their quarterly review, and Agent Martinez called. They've recovered another $400,000 from Harold's Costa Rica accounts." As I prepared for the meeting, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. 6 months ago, I'd been the betrayed wife of a criminal. Now I was the founding partner of a financial firm that had become a model for transparency and accountability, featured in financial journals and studied by regulators as an example of reform in the industry. The best revenge, it turned out, wasn't destroying Harold. It was proving that integrity could triumph over deception, that trust could be rebuilt stronger than before, and that sometimes our greatest betrayals become the foundation for our most meaningful victories. Harold had tried to steal my future. Instead, he'd given me a purpose I never could have imagined. 2 years after Harold's arrest, I found myself addressing the National Association of Financial Planners at their annual conference in Chicago. The auditorium was packed with industry professionals, eager to hear about the Millbrook model, our revolutionary approach to transparent financial management that had become a template for reform across the country. "Trust isn't just rebuilt through policies and procedures," I told the assembled crowd. "It's rebuilt through daily choices, through radical transparency, and through the willingness to put clients' interests above profits, even when it's difficult." After my presentation, a young woman approached me at the book signing table. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm starting my own practice next year. Your model inspired me to enter this field, knowing that financial planning can be done ethically." These conversations had become common over the past year. Young professionals, inspired by our story of redemption, were entering the field with a commitment to transparency that would have been unthinkable in Harold's generation. We were changing not just our own practice, but the entire industry's approach to client relationships. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Just saw the news about Harold's sentencing. 22 years, how do you feel?" I excused myself from the conference and called her back. "I feel grateful," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. "Not because he's suffering, but because justice was served for all the families he hurt." Margaret's voice was thoughtful. "I've been thinking about forgiveness lately, not for Harold, I'm not ready for that yet, but for myself, for being so easily manipulated, for betraying our friendship." "You were grieving and vulnerable," I reminded her. "Harold exploited that grief. The responsibility lies with him, not you." David's been saying the same thing. Speaking of which, he has news. He's been offered a position with the SEC, heading up their new Elder Financial Protection Division. They want him because of his experience with our case. The news filled me with pride. David's work exposing Harold's crimes had attracted national attention, leading to congressional hearings and new regulations protecting elderly investors. Our family tragedy had sparked systemic reform that would protect countless future victims. Back in Millbrook, our firm had grown to manage over $50 million in assets for 127 families. We'd hired 2 additional advisors and an in-house compliance officer, all committed to our principles of radical transparency. Our client retention rate was 98%, unheard of in an industry where customers routinely switched firms seeking better returns. But the most meaningful development wasn't professional, it was personal. At 70, I had discovered a sense of purpose I'd never experienced during my decades as Harold's supporting wife. The woman who'd answered Margaret's misdirected phone call had been defined by her relationships to others. The woman I'd become was defined by her own choices, her own values, her own impact on the world. That evening, as I walked through Millbrook's town center, I passed the old offices where Harold had perpetrated his crimes. The building now housed a community center for senior citizens, funded partially by recovered assets from Harold's schemes. The Henderson family had proposed the center, wanting something positive to emerge from their financial trauma. Mrs. Blackwell, now 94 and still sharp, waved from the center's reading room. "Eleanor, come tell me about your speech in Chicago." As I joined her for tea and stories, I realized that Harold's greatest failure wasn't getting caught, it was underestimating the resilience of the people he'd betrayed. Every family he'd robbed had found ways to rebuild stronger than before. Every relationship he'd tried to destroy had emerged more authentic. The scared, devastated woman who'd discovered her husband's betrayal was gone, replaced by someone Harold never could have imagined. A leader who'd turned his legacy of deception into a foundation for unprecedented trust. 5 years after that devastating phone call that changed everything, I stood in the federal courthouse in Boston, watching Harold shuffle into the visitor's room in his orange prison jumpsuit. At 73, he looked far older than his years, gray-haired, stooped, and wearing the hollow expression of a man who'd lost everything that once defined him. "Eleanor," he said quietly, settling into the chair across from me. "Thank you for coming. I'd debated this visit for months." Harold had been writing letters from prison, not asking for forgiveness or money, but simply requesting one conversation. Agent Martinez had advised against it, but David Chen thought it might provide closure for both of us. "You look well," Harold continued, his eyes taking in my confident posture and professional attire. "I've been reading about the firm in the financial journals. You've built something remarkable." "We've built something honest," I corrected. "Something you could never have imagined, because honesty was never part of your vocabulary." Harold nodded slowly, accepting the rebuke without argument. "I've had 5 years to think about what I did, Eleanor. To all of you, the families I robbed, Margaret's trust, your marriage, your reputation. There's no excuse for any of it." "No, there isn't," I agreed. "The question is why you wanted to see me. What could you possibly have to say after all this time?" Harold was quiet for a long moment, staring at his shackled hands. "I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of what you've accomplished. The Millbrook model, the congressional testimony, the industry reforms. You've turned my crimes into something that's protecting thousands of families. That takes a kind of strength I never possessed." The admission caught me off guard. I'd expected manipulation, self-pity, or attempts at justification. Instead, Harold sounded genuinely remorseful, perhaps for the first time in his life. "I also wanted you to know that Margaret visits me," he continued. "Once a month, for the past year. She doesn't come to forgive me or rekindle anything, she comes to understand. To make sense of how she could have been so thoroughly deceived." "And what have you told her?" "The truth. That I identified her vulnerabilities after Robert's death and exploited them systematically, that every moment of our relationship was calculated manipulation, that she was never anything more than a means to an end." Harold's voice cracked slightly. "It's been the hardest thing I've ever had to admit." I studied his face, searching for signs of the charming manipulator who'd fooled so many people for so long. Instead, I saw something I'd never witnessed before: genuine accountability. "What do you want from me, Harold? Forgiveness? Absolution?" "Nothing," he said simply. "I wanted you to know that I understand what I cost you, and I wanted you to know that watching you transform that loss into something meaningful has been the only redemption I'll ever experience." As I prepared to leave, Harold spoke one final time. "Eleanor, that morning when you answered Margaret's call, I know you think it was an accident that exposed my crimes, but I think it was the universe finally giving you the truth you deserved." Walking out of the prison, into the bright autumn sunshine, I felt the last weight of my old life lifting away. The woman who'd been devastated by Harold's betrayal was truly gone now, replaced by someone who understood that our greatest challenges often become our most profound opportunities. Harold would spend the rest of his life paying for his crimes, but I would spend the rest of mine building on the foundation his destruction had unexpectedly provided. The circle was finally complete. 10 years have passed since that fateful morning when Margaret's misdirected phone call shattered my world and rebuilt it into something infinitely better. As I write this, sitting in my home office overlooking the thriving Millbrook community Harold once tried to exploit, I'm struck by the profound truth that our deepest betrayals often become our greatest blessings. Millbrook Trust and Fiduciary Services now manages over $200 million in assets for more than 400 families across New England. We've become the gold standard for transparent financial planning, with our model adopted by firms nationwide. David Chen leads the SEC's Elder Protection Division, using lessons learned from Harold's crimes to protect countless vulnerable investors. Margaret, now 75, serves on our board of directors and has become one of the most effective advocates for financial fraud prevention in the country. The families Harold robbed have not only recovered financially, but have thrived. Tommy Morrison graduated from Harvard and now works as a financial crimes prosecutor. The Henderson family established a scholarship fund for children of fraud victims. Mrs. Blackwell, at 99, still manages her own portfolio with our guidance and jokes that Harold inadvertently gave her the best financial education of her life. As for Harold, he remains in federal prison, where he'll likely spend his remaining years. I've learned to feel neither hatred nor pity for him. He's simply a cautionary tale about the corrosive power of greed and deception. The most profound lesson from this journey isn't about financial crime or marital betrayal. It's about the resilience of the human spirit and our capacity to transform devastation into purpose. When Harold tried to destroy me, he inadvertently freed me to become someone I never could have imagined. A leader, an advocate, a woman defined by her own choices rather than her relationships to others. That terrifying phone call didn't end my story. It began the most meaningful chapter of my life. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the catalyst for the best thing we ever accomplish. The truth, as painful as it may be, truly does set us free.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.